Hello and welcome to another episode of the ADHD Goals podcast. I have a fascinating guest for you today. Her name is Dr. Emily Levy, and she is the founder and director of EBL Coaching, a specialized tutoring program that offers individualized one-on-one home, virtual, and on-site instruction using research-based multisensory techniques. She is also the author of Strategies for Study Success, which is a 22-part student workbook series that teaches students strategies for test taking, note taking, reading comprehension, writing, summarizing, and executive functioning. So, welcome to the show, Dr. Emily. How are you today?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to be here today.
Fantastic. Have you been enjoying a good start to the year so far?
So far, so good. It's been pretty cold here, but other than that, it's been a great start.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited to learn about what it is that you do, but we typically tend to start the show by trying to learn a little bit more about your background and how you got into what it is that you do. So, would you mind telling us a little bit about your experience working within the ADHD field?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I actually grew up in the field of special education. I grew up down in Florida, where my mother was the founder of a school for students with learning disabilities and ADHD. So I spent so much of my childhood working at her school, observing students, working with students who have ADHD, really seeing them thrive with the right methodologies and the right teaching approaches. And that was what ultimately inspired me to go into the field of special education. I then went to Brown University and received my undergraduate degree there. I then received my master's degree in special education and my doctorate degree in education. And I started out personally tutoring students with ADHD and learning disabilities myself until I sort of maxed out my time and couldn't fit any more students into my own schedule. So I very slowly and organically started to bring on other experts, other tutors who specialized in different skill areas, and eventually formed what is now EBL Coaching, where we provide not just in-person tutoring to students with ADHD and learning disabilities in the New York area, but we now work with students worldwide with our virtual platform. So we've really been able to expand and help so many individuals thrive and build their academic skills.
That sounds fascinating. And what struck me as you were telling us all that is because you've experienced seeing, the work that your mother's school was doing. I wonder if you have a viewpoint on how the way children were taught with ADHD and other learning challenges, how that might have changed over the years and what changes you've seen?
Well, I think there's definitely more recognition and more of a diagnosis that is happening now with ADHD and with learning disabilities. I think previously, many kids were just labeled as being disorganized or lazy or not focused, but now there's more awareness and more of a diagnosis. So I think kids are receiving treatment, better treatment now than they did historically. I still think there's ways to go though in terms of how to best treat and teach students with ADHD within the classroom setting. I think so many of them are bright, they have so much potential, but they really need the right instructional approach in the classroom in order to thrive academically.
Hmm. And when you talk about that help within the classroom, are you talking about in a classroom with children of all abilities, or are you talking about in a classroom where it might be or children requiring the same needs? Because I understand that probably one of the reasons why we still need to make improvements in that area is the resources that schools have available to offer th- that extra care.
Sure. Well, really, I was referring to both, but I do think in a more specialized setting, I think students tend to receive better support because it's sort of more tailored to the kinds of students within that classroom. I think it's more challenging when it's a more general education setting, when they're more sort of, included within a general population. I think it becomes more challenging to give students with ADHD the right support. But I think with more professional development, with more strategies that teachers can learn to implement in the classroom, the more we'll start to see these students with ADHD thrive within that general classroom setting.
Mm. 'Cause I suppose on the larger scale, it's really that general education setting where I suppose more more benefit could be gained from making incremental improvements. I suppose.
Absolutely. And I think that's where more of the need is at this point.
Yeah. So how would you address that? I mean, I understand from the student workbook that you've got, it might address some of these strategies. What are some of those strategies that would help in that general education sector?
There's so many different strategies. I think first off, teaching using a very structured and systematic approach is very helpful. Starting with teacher modeling, using this structured approach, and then giving kids lots of repetition within whatever concept they're learning. I think that teaching strategies for time management, for example, would be very helpful. Let's estimate how much time we think a task might take to complete and then compare it to the actual time it takes to really work on time management. We can also work on skills like organization. Sometimes using a strategy like color coding is very helpful. Let's choose blue for math and green for science and yellow for English or whatever it may be. And then let's make sure all of our folders are in that one color. If we have an assignment book, which students should also be using, maybe we highlight the math assignments in blue, the science assignments in green, and so on. So it's really using these systematic approaches to help students with ADHD develop their organizational skills and develop their executive functioning skills.
Mm. As you were describing that, then it was making me think that perhaps what you're saying is it's about providing students with almost like the scaffolding for learning as opposed to not necessarily teaching a subject in a particular way. I mean, obviously it might help with, being more visual or something like that, but what it's almost like life skills of how to be more organized and if you can help the students to be more organized and then it helps makes the learning easier. Would that be?
Exactly, because it's usually not the content that students with ADHD have trouble grasping. It's that they need the scaffolding and the organizational tools in order to sort of process and utilize that content. So, yes, I would say absolutely.
So I mean, you do the EBL coaching. Do you have specific schools themselves, or do you also help in the general education system by going in and helping the schools and the teachers to develop their teaching strategies?
Well, our specialty really is one on one coaching and one on one tutoring with children. So we work with kids from all different types of schools, general education settings, special education settings, parochial schools, all kinds of schools. But we work one on one with each student where we identify what their specific challenges are. And then we come up with an individualized instructional plan to develop what they need the most help with. With that said, oftentimes we'll collaborate with teachers, we'll collaborate with parents and teach them strategies that they can use to help reinforce what we're working on during our sessions.
That's interesting because I was having a conversation with somebody today, and this wasn't with a school, but this is like a workplace, an organization, and we were talking about the possibilities of me coming in and doing some one-to-one coaching with people. But I was also saying, it's all well and good sort of doing one-on-one coaching and identify what executive function challenges somebody is having at work. But it's also worth identifying from the workplace's point of view is if a number of people are having similar challenges with similar things, is it not, should we not look at how maybe that particular workplace can remove the friction from what particular process and, you know, embracing that universal design concept of improving the processes for all. And I wonder, that can be a challenge with the school, but how do you negotiate that conversation with maybe working with the school to improve the scaffolding again, I suppose?
Sure. Well, I agree in that it's not just individuals with ADHD who benefit from scaffolding. Really, all children do. All children benefit from learning organizational tools and systems and a scaffolded approach. So I believe the more that we can integrate that into the classroom, the more we can help not just students with ADHD, but really all students to thrive in school.
Hmm. I wonder if you could maybe tell us a few more of these, enlighten us on a few more of these strategies that you've mentioned in the workbook, particularly around test taking. That's, I mean, that causes a lot of stress for all students, but I mean, it'd be wonderful to understand what the strategies you've got for that.
Sure. There's so many different strategies for test taking. A lot of it is identifying what the challenge is with the child. Are they struggling with certain subjects, with all subjects? What is sort of the breakdown there? But some students respond well to creating flashcards, either physical flashcards, for example, learning vocabulary words, where they might write the word on the front of a card, the definition, maybe a key picture, and a sentence using the words in the back. Some kids like using online programs for creating flashcards like Quizlet, but the physical act of writing out those cards often helps information to stick in our long-term memory. So that's a strategy that works really nicely for learning vocabulary or learning important terms. There's also a two-column strategy that some students really benefit from, where let's say they have to read a passage and learn information from that passage. Well, they might create two columns and write the topic of the passage on the top. And on the right side, use bullet points to create notes in their own words on what they read. And then when they're done with that, go back and categorize those notes into individual main ideas from each of those sections. So again, it's that kinesthetic approach. They're summarizing the information, they're making sure they understand it, and they're creating that scaffolded approach again to really learning and grasping the information. So those are just a few examples of test taking strategies that can really help students learn information for a test.
Yeah, I mean, so if I understand this correctly, let's just say, first of all, one way of receiving that information is if the teacher is just verbally telling them the information, and that's one way of absorbing the information. But what you're saying, by using the flashcards, transferring that information from what you're hearing or reading and then writing it down, your hand writing those words is perhaps using a different part of the brain to make sense of the information, and then adding a picture is adding a visual thing. So I'm trying to figure out if what you're doing is reinforcing sort of various different parts of the brain to sort of really mold the information into something more solid.
Exactly. It's really using that multisensory approach to help the information stick in our long-term memory.
Perfect. Well, that I mean, I did use that the other day because I recently started doing some stand up comedy, and I basically performed last night, but I wrote something the night before, and it only stuck in my brain from actually sort of writing post-it notes out and then typing it up, and it just, the more repeated moments of, right, transferring the information from one place to another, really built that structure of it. And it's sort of interesting how I was then able to remember it,
Mm.
which, from beforehand, it was just like lots of thoughts spinning around in my head. Um, I think it's fascinating understanding, how the brain receives information and how it stores information, and I think it's so useful to understand those things to help people learn better. Um, is it in terms of with ADHD? I mean, speaking from my own point of view, I do get a little bit lost sometimes when receiving information verbally, and I would say I'm, a visual learner. But is that a common thing with ADHD or not always a typical thing?
I think it varies. I think that oftentimes students with ADHD will lose focus when they're either reading a passage or they're listening to a lecture. And as a result, they miss out on a lot of the information. So, if we can teach them active reading strategies and active listening strategies, it helps them both with building their focus and also with retaining and learning the information.
So you say, sorry, I'm just interested in when you said active reading and active listening. Could you describe in a little bit more detail what that actually means? With
Sure. So exactly. So by active reading, I mean really engaging with the text. So for example, one strategy that we teach for helping students to become more active readers is a highlighting strategy, where we teach them that when we read, there are three elements that we should look for. The first is the topic, which is one, two, or three words describing the passage, like World War One or the beach. And we learn to highlight the topic in blue. The second element that we look for is the main idea, which is what the author saying about the topic. So if the topic, for instance, is World War One, the main idea might be there were many causes for World War One, and we highlight the main idea in green, and then we go through and highlight the important details in yellow. So what we're doing is we're teaching students to not just read all the information in one shot and hope that they remember and retain it, but as they're reading it, they're looking and they're highlighting this key information so that they can really process the information and focus on the information that they're reading rather than just passively reading it and again hoping that they remember what they read.
hmm Now, I'm interested to know the blue, green, yellow system is is that just simply those three colors, and it helps if everybody's using the same system, or is there any emotional connection to the information at all that you the reason why you've chosen those colors?
And there's no reasoning behind those colors to have consistency. If a student loves pink instead of blue, that's totally fine. It's just the key is being consistent with whatever color they choose.
Okay, I thought so. It's just that in the back of my mind, I had because I was a graphic designer in my previous career, and so I thought, oh, there might be like an emotional connection to the reason why those colors have been used. But yeah,
Got it.
that I mean that's fascinating because I remember the first time when we started getting the Kindle readers and things like that, and you could actually start highlighting things on devices and stuff. And I think to have a system like that, it's very useful because in the end, I would just start highlighting everything in the same color, and it makes once everything is highlighted, it makes no sense.
Right. Yeah. Having a systematic approach is very helpful.
Yeah, I'm actually going to start using that.
Great.
That is really good. And so the same then with active listening. How can you become more active with listening?
Sure. So, for instance, if a child is in a classroom and and listening to a lecture, right, again, rather than just listening and hoping that they don't lose focus or become distracted, we might teach them a note-taking strategy, sort of similar to that two-column approach that I mentioned before, where they might take a sheet of paper, or some students will use a laptop or a computer for this, and they'll divide their paper two-thirds on the right and one-third on the left. And they'll write the topic of the lecture on the top of their page, and they'll take notes only on the right side of their page. So they're listening, but they're taking notes. So they need to make sure they're understanding and processing the information so they can get it down. And they can use bullet points or they can use symbols and abbreviations, contractions, whatever they need to in order to get the information down. And then at the end of the day or the end of the lecture, they'll go back and they'll categorize those notes again into the individual main ideas from that lecture. So they're making sure that they not just got down all of the information and didn't miss anything, but they actually understood the information in order to create those categories, those main ideas. So it's again teaching them to be active listeners. It also happens to build their note taking and their processing skills as well. So it really taps into a lot of different skill areas.
Hmm. If I think about myself in that whole scenario of note taking, I mean, I'm taking notes now as we chat, but I quite often, whenever I've taken notes in meetings or been trying to remember stuff, I'm taking the notes, but sometimes it needs that extra level of reflection afterwards to then synthesize what it is that I've actually learned. Or transfer the information from the notebook into somewhere that it's going to be useful for me to collect it again later. Because I mean, I fill up a notebook and then I put it, in a shelf, and then I never look at it again. So it's either gone into my brain because I've taken the notes, or it was kind of not necessarily pointless in taking the notes. But I think it's important to have a system for then summarizing and storing, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got active reading and acting, and those are two things that I'm definitely going to adopt. I wonder, is when you're working one on one with a child with ADHD, and you're giving them these strategies. Oh, sorry, I'll start that again. When you are working one on one with children who might have ADHD, and you're teaching them these strategies, how easy is it for them to be able to employ these strategies in a situation where they are in general education without it being, no, I don't want to use the word disruptive, but how can they be accommodated within the general education process to be able to have the time to adapt to these new skills? How do you facilitate them transitioning into being able to develop these skills?
Sure. Well, of course, every child is different, but often what we do to help with that process is we start by teaching a strategy in isolation. So, for example, if a child is struggling to organize their thoughts on paper when writing, we might start by teaching them a strategy for how to brainstorm, write, and self check their work, not related to a school assignment. And after we've taught them that strategy, we might then bring in a writing assignment they have to do for school and show them how to apply that strategy to their schoolwork. And the same is true with other strategies that we teach. We'll teach the strategy in isolation and then bring in an actual school assignment so we can help them make that connection. Oftentimes, we also find it helpful to reach out and stay in touch with teachers so that they know which strategies we're using with the student. And if they can help reinforce those in the classroom, of course, that's very helpful and beneficial as well.
So it's kind of like not teaching them everything at once, but a step by step. Here's one tool that you can use, and allow them to get proficient in it, in something outside of school, so that they're a bit more able and ready to do it once they're in that school setting. And as that brings in the parent into the equation. And I wonder, what advice do you have when you're, you know working with parents, when you're doing the one-to-one help with the children?
Well, we find that the more reinforcement that parents can do in between sessions, the more progress we tend to see. So, what we find is helpful is showing parents strategies that we're using with their child during the actual tutoring sessions, and then what they can do at home to reinforce those strategies in between sessions. And they'll sort of reflect on that in the next session. Were you able to use a strategy in between our sessions? How did it go? Do you feel it was helpful for you? And then sort of move forward from there. Not every strategy works for every student. So sometimes it's a matter of tweaking and really identifying the strategies that work best for each student. But again, the more the parents can reinforce in between sessions, the more progress we tend to see.
And do some of these strategies, do they focus on sort of things outside the classroom, and things that actually might actually be organizing, or at the home, in home life?
Sure. Some of it bridges into a home life. For example, when we work on scheduling and calendars, we don't just focus on school assignments, but what else does the student have going on that week? Do they have sports practices, sports games? Do they have extracurricular activities? When will they have time to get to their homework? When will they be able to study for a test coming up on Friday? So we do sort of build in other aspects of their lives into many of the strategies that we teach them.
Mm. Because I think it's challenging. The difference between working with adults and children is an adult tends to have a lot more autonomy of how they spend their time, whereas with a child, they it's a little more challenging to give them the autonomy to do the things that they need to do to help them, thrive, like or take a break or things like that. So it's just seemed quite challenging, that aspect of it.
It can be challenging, and they tend to have sort of less time after school to get in a lot that they need to get done. And I think sometimes students with ADHD lose track of time, or they wait to the last minute to get started and then they run out of time. So they really learning how to manage their time is even more important for that reason.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, time management is still a challenging thing for me.
Sure.
I wonder what's the new year looking like for you in terms of where development and growth for the EBL coaching. What plans have you got on the
Sure.
horizon?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, it's been so exciting to expand our reach to helping more and more students with ADHD, not just in our local area, but throughout the United States and throughout the world. So we have students in Asia and Europe and really all over now, which has been exciting. And I hope to continue to grow that because it's an opportunity to really help teach students with ADHD strategies that are so effective in helping them thrive in school where they might not have access to those kinds of resources in their local area. So that's been just a great way to help so many more kids in so many different geographic regions that really need the support, really need these strategies, but may not otherwise have access to it.
Mm. And you mentioned the online aspect of it. Obviously you've got a worldwide reach now, but a lot of what you've been talking about in terms of the strategies involve that physical activity of writing things down. And one of the questions I was thinking of before, but I forgot to ask is, do you feel that there is a difference in terms of, if you're trying to remember stuff, writing something down as opposed to typing, with the understanding that so much more of education is typing and on computers and, supporting people online via, and things like that. Do you have any strategies to cope with the more digital online world?
Sure. Most of the strategies that we historically used with pen and paper can be done with typing and with computers. And many students these days actually prefer that. So the same kind of kinesthetic piece that applies when writing a flashcard can apply when typing it on a computer as well. Some students still prefer that old traditional style, but I would say more and more are sort of preferring to use computers and online tech tools. And there's so many other great tools that have been developed that we can use with online options and even with our phones and calendars. So I think that it's been a good thing. I think more has evolved, more technology has developed to help students with ADHD, and we continue to integrate that and implement those strategies into our coaching.
Mhm. I think, yeah, I mean, personally, it's far more easy for me to write things down, but like I was saying before, it's far more useful for me to have it stored digitally later on. And yeah, I was just wondering if there was any science behind that, it is actually better for most people to write things down, or are you finding that some people actually do retain more information if they type it?
I don't think it's a black and white answer. I think it
Yeah.
really depends on the individual. I think some students and adults thrive with just doing online typing tech tools, and others like to physically write or start by writing and then transition that information to typing. So it just really depends on the individual.
Mm. I did like the look of something I saw recently here in the UK. There's a grant that people can get called Access to Work, and it does allow you to purchase, like, software or hardware that you might need. And there was one of those tablets that you can actually sort of write down, but then it would digitize it for you, and that looks
Right.
really
Yeah,
good.
those are great cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
So where can people get hold of the 22-part student workbook series? Is that available on your website?
It is available on our website, which is eblcoaching.com. There's also lots of other information on our website, articles I've written, other podcasts, information about our program. But yes, our books are there, and they're also on Amazon.
And if people wanted to work with you, in terms of actually having some of this one-to-one coaching, how might they start that journey with you?
Sure. So the best way would be to go to our website. There's a contact form there that they can fill out. We respond very quickly, but that's really the best way to sort of initiate that process.
Excellent. Well, I will put links to those on the show notes, and yeah, I think that definitely, even from just having a conversation with you today, I've picked up four different things that I'm going to take away from that and start applying them into just my day-to-day note taking. So that's fascinating. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Emily. I wish you all the best for the new year, and yeah, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Excellent. Take care. Bye bye. Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.